Hi everyone, this is Joey from Waterroots. Today I'm with Shikha from India who works with Climate Group. She's one of the most influential and amazing people I know. We met at an interfaith program on climate change at Duke. So thank you so much for joining me, Shikha, and sharing your water story.
Pleasure is all mine, Joe. Thank you so much for having me. And I think that's too kind an introduction for me. I'm not that influential. But yes, I think I find inspiration in your work and the impactful projects that you are doing at Waterroots. So happy to have the conversation with you.
Thank you. So the idea is we want to share more about your water experiences and how it's impacted your work today. So could you please talk a little bit about that?
Right. So there are so many thoughts when we talk about water, especially in a country which is in global south, right? There are issues with water contamination. The first and foremost issue which comes to my mind is drinking water, right? I am having a cup of water right next to me, but it's um if you look at it, the process of making it safe to drink, there is a long way to go, right? And it's not the um first and foremost is the issue with clean drinking water in India, right? And this is something which is all across the country. You must have heard stories about how, foreigners are coming and they are the first very housekeeping advisory guideline that is given to them is to buy packaged water. So that is I think access to clean drinking water is not a luxury that needs to be a basic need that is provided to all the citizens. So that is number one. And the issue with access to safe drinking water or water insecurity also has implications on um, rural urban divide as well, right? Because it also comes to access to resources to um, have access to clean drinking water. We may have certain populations which could not afford RO system, right? And again, as I said, this needs not to be a luxury. This is the topmost problem with water, which is coming to my mind right now. Another thing is also the issues, the health hazards and the implications on health that we are having, because it's not a guarantee that even if you have the RO systems apparently installed in your building, in your society, then it gives you the access to clean drinking water still, because it depends on the TDS levels, right? And if the ROs are not capable to break down the TDS to the safe drinking levels, it still has high health implications, which unfortunately cannot be determined in the immediately, but it has implications in the long term. Besides this, hair fall is something which is such a common issue with people across all the stages, and the primary reason behind this is hard water, especially in the rural areas. Another thing, when I think about the water issues, there are so many that it's so hard to pinpoint what leads it's actually a vicious cycle, right? When I talk about the access to safe drinking water, there are so many cases in India. In the recent example is of a state called Karnataka, where in a city of Bangalore, there is literally crisis of water because people are not having any water, right? And this also stems from accessibility to river water and the politics when it comes to accessing that resource. I'll take a pause here now and hear maybe your thoughts about it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for sharing. I know that every region, and like India is a big country, and we've heard that all different regions experience different water stress. I like how you mentioned how the politicization of water can lead to conflict
Yes.
as well. I don't know if you remember, but like our group in Pakistan was telling us about how the water mafia there in Karachi controls a lot. Um, and I wanted to hear from your experience, is government control an issue in terms of water security in India, or at least in the regions you've experienced? And is there something that you've seen as a potential solution to this issue?
Right. I do recall the movie that we watched together in at Duke about this, and I was able to draw parallels with India as well, because when I mention about the Bangalore water crisis, there is another issue which was highlighted back 5 years back in 2019 with the Chennai water dispute, where exactly the same reason was there because of uh, the transboundary river issue of who gets to have the shared access. And this was also highlighted in the High Court about the access to the river water. This also dates back to India Pakistan. We just mentioned about that Indus Water Treaty was one of the prominent landmark policies to have access to shared river resource between India and Pakistan. So yes, these issues, it's still prevalent in the present times as well, and the only solution to it, I think, because it's a scarce resource, it's a shrinking resource. um the only policy solution that I can think is having access to solutions like rainwater harvesting to begin with, in order to have access to more water as a resource. Mm, Sewage treatment could be another thing, and these are the things which are on the top of my mind, that which is just clicking me right now. Another very interesting project that I did on water was the rejuvenation of water bodies, especially the ponds and the lakes, right? And the idea was that the water bodies, which apparently needs to be a water body, is exactly filled with silt and soil, and how to extract that silt, take it away, so that when there is a next monsoon cycle, how that could be rejuvenated and that water could be treated to supply to the villages nearby, to the citizens for their access. And when we talk about water, it's interesting to see how the intersectionality works out, right? Because there is so much livelihood which is dependent upon this particular resource, of especially when we trickle down to the grassroots level. So that's another interesting insight that I could recall from my experience on the water body rejuvenation project. The idea of that project was to also use the extracted silt to provide to the farmers so that they could use it for their harvest season, right? So this way, it's the effective utilization of the resources. And we just talked about the scarcity of it. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear about resource utilization, and since water is so scarce, how it can be applied to so many different fields. I know in a place like India where like the Indus River Valley or like the Ganga, these have all had like historical, very influential um, impacts on the people of the surrounding community. I think it's really interesting to hear this story. I want to hear a little bit more about, I know you do a lot of environmental policy work and how this has shifted your perspective, your perceptive of the environment from like a grassroots to like an overarching policy perspective.
Right. Another interesting question which makes me think about the takeaways from my experience so far. But one thing which is on the top of my head is, um, when we talk about policy making, decision making, it's very important to bring all the stakeholders together on one platform, right? It cannot be done in silos. It's important to have the voices of every community member, which would be eventually impacted, right? And make it a holistic exercise, instead of one which is just done, as I said, in silos. um it's important to have the bottoms up approach, especially when it comes to key problems which are so fundamental in nature, especially like the one that we are speaking about, water, right? In my experience, especially in my work with climate group and my previous organizations as well, I've noticed that um the effort of us as a CSO or as a non-profit is to bring all these stakeholders together and to represent the voices of a subnational leaders, along with the voices of youth groups, along with the voices of other CSOs in the same space, along with the voices of community leaders, their representatives, and then bringing a holistic perspective, right? It's very important to have that in policy making. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I wanted to hear, how do you think climate change has impacted all the work that you do, and especially in terms of water?
Uh, Quite interesting. Okay, so I can recall and a story here. I hail from a state of Punjab, right? And that's the breadbasket of India, as it is commonly called. Um, it dates back to the time of Green Revolution, somewhere in the 1960s, where there was the need to provide, just after the independence, to provide for the high demand for food, right? For food in India, to produce. So there are two major crops, wheat and rice, which is being produced in India and in Punjab, sorry. And both the crops are very water intensive. But the long term implication of it has been that using of high yield crops, as we commonly call it as HYV, high yielding variety crops, use of excessive fertilizers, excessive pesticides, has eventually led to years down the line, um, groundwater depletion, right? And the quality of water, the water table has depleted to such an extent that it cannot be bring back to what it was maybe in the 1960s. So the implications when you ask about climate change are everywhere in our day-to-day life, right? And it cannot be when I hear things like, oh, you are environment conscious, my instant reaction is, should this not be the default state? It's not something that it is just affecting me, or it is just affecting the urban. It is not, it is affecting each one of us. It is an issue which really transcend the boundaries, right? It's not something that you're in the States speaking to me in India, and this is something which is a global south problem, right? So it's hard for me to answer this because I see the implications of climate change everywhere, right? From our day-to-day life to literally the wars, right? Because it is happening because of limited resources and everyone wants to have access to it. um I might have derailed from your question, but
No,
yeah.
you're so good. I think what you spoke about is really, really important. The idea that climate isn't just a field that a few people work on, but it's something everyone should consider that acts in all parts of our lives. I think something I've noticed is that I can't be like, okay, I'm gonna do climate work with Waterroots, and then for the rest of my time just not think about it at all. It kind of governs a lot of who you are and your identity. One
Yeah.
final question, and I don't usually ask this, but because you're such a big inspiration, what advice would you have for people who are just listening to these stories for the first time, who haven't engaged in the environmental field, who want to get involved, and who aren't really sure how? Because it is a very daunting issue, especially fighting like global climate change, and in the case of water, like politicization, um, interdisciplinary work, like all these things, it's really hard for one person to tackle alone. So do you have any advice for people to come in and be able to find impact for themselves?
Ah, okay. So I think I'm still on my learning curve, and I don't know, like, if this I'm in a position to give an advice. But one thing that I speak to myself during my reflective exercises is, it's an overwhelming time, right? We are in a very overwhelming time. There are a lot of things which are, there are a lot of problems around us that we want to solve, and we are, if we look with a passionate eye, we feel like, oh, are we doing really enough? There is so much to tackle. There are so many solutions still to be found about the most fundamental problems. But the only thing that boils down to in my reflective exercises are that, even if you could do your own bit, which may think small, but it should not impede you from doing it by just looking at the sheer uh, quantum of it, about how much still needs to be done, right? um there is a saying, right? Like, if that fish story, that if I'm putting one fish into the sea, I might not make a difference to the entire ocean, but it makes a change in that one fish's life, right? So it's the same analogy here. There is so much to, there is so much to contribute to, even if we could do it in our own tiny capacity, just by starting, by making a dialogue about it, by having uh, awareness session or something, right? um we still can make a lot of difference. um I'll probably just pause here.
Thank you so much for sharing. You're such an inspiration and very humble. It's always great to speak and learn from you. Thank you for sharing your water story.
Thanks so much, Joey. It was lovely speaking to you too.